The King's Quest series has touched nearly everyone that I know in some way. Whether people played the games themselves as kids or teamed up with parents and neighbors to text, parse, point, and click through these stories, many of them got a big dose of King Graham and his family in some shape or form. In my case, I played King's Quest V on the NES and its successor King's Quest VI on PC when I was little, and it took me many months to get through both of them without any internet back then. Nonetheless, these were wonderful experiences that I thoroughly enjoyed and am still very nostalgic for to this day. I dabbled in a couple of the earlier games on the Steam collection a while back, but it didn't take me long to find a great reason to revisit the first game again, a Master System release. The backstory of King's Quest, Quest for the Crown, is told eloquently in the manual. These pages detail the tribulations of King Edward, the current ailing leader of Daventry. After tragically losing his wife and 3 treasured possessions that helped the royal family drive his kingdom's prosperity for many years, King Edward needs help to save the land from impending doom. Playing as Sir Graham, you're promised the throne if you can help to recover the missing relics. The story obviously serves its purpose as an exposition dump, but it also alludes to a couple of hints about where the 3 treasures are hidden away, and who might be hiding them. These bits of trivia flew right over my head when I was younger, but coming back to it now, I loved how these little secrets were hidden in plain sight. For games from an era where it wasn't always clear what you were looking at most of the time, any help was better than none. They even went so far as to illustrate some of it on the box art. It looked awesome compared to some of the other stuff I've seen released for the Master System. Fundamentally, King's Quest I is really a story about many other tales and their characters all mashed up into this weird little fantasy world. There are all sorts of creatures roaming around, many of which want to kill or eat you. Thankfully, there are almost as many friendly ones that will help you out along the way. Many of the problems this game throws at you deal directly with these characters, or getting creative with items you find while exploring. Being familiar with nursery rhymes and other childhood bedtime stories is much needed context for this adventure, and I can't imagine trying to win this game without that knowledge. In terms of the fun factor, the solutions are reasonably clever, with logic usually winning the day, but there are some that require you to throw out the rulebook and get creative. When comparing the different versions of the game, the Master System port has a few unique puzzle resolutions, but listing them here for you would spoil all the fun in finding out for yourself. One thing I appreciated was that the map was at least identical. For some reason, while I was plotting mine out, it went horribly wrong at some point. At least it worked to keep me on track. One other major distinction is just how different the problem-solving feels in the Master System version, but I'll talk more about that later. When comparing it directly to the original version of King's Quest I on DOS, the Master System game looks considerably modernized. It doesn't reach the heights of the visual masterpieces that are the even later remakes, but the Master System port has a lot of colors and details in both its graphics and presentation. Most notable are the changes to Graham's appearance. He's been transformed from his broken ankle sporting self into something far more human-like, and dare I say that he sometimes even looks like Dennis the Menace from certain angles with those red pants on. A lot of the locations also look more polished overall, even adding movement to some of the water bodies for extra flair, but I still found myself going back and forth on which version's graphics I preferred more. For example, the gingerbread house in the original game was gaudier compared to the neat and trim one in the Master System one. But on the other hand, nearly all the outdoor areas with trees and rocks were prettier on the console. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's really a matter of taste, but generally I like the Master System version's aesthetic more. When it comes to the music, unfortunately, just like the original game, there was very little of it or ambient sound to speak of. I think the Master System game somehow has even less sound and music than other versions, but thankfully they kept all of the important ditties that play when you find an item or succumb to one of the many hazards out there. The death music still comes complete with its usual teasing tone at the end to rub in whatever trip to the underworld you've stumbled into. The biggest change from other versions of King's Quest is that the Master System game isn't a text parser. Instead, it takes on a totally different form that harkens back to early LucasArts games with a list of verbs available to work with on each screen. This setup is a little bit more tailored than those games and evolves depending on which screen you're on, as well as with what you have in your inventory at the time. The flip to noun and verb lists is either a blessing or a curse depending on how you enjoy your adventure games best. In a text parser, you have the gift of guessing, which can add quite a bit to the experience. Walking into a new room for the first time and sizing up everything while trying to figure out what you can interact with is exciting, especially if you're like me, trying to seal everything that isn't nailed down. Successfully identifying pixel blobs can be a source of limitless entertainment in a first playthrough, just as much as innovating ways to use them can be. Half of my fun in these kinds of games was trying to get a rise out of the narrator by performing a heinous act every now and again to see if they noticed. The other side of the coin here is that having to use your imagination all the time can feel stifling. Not quite knowing the correct command words the developers intended, or even how to spell them, could conceivably stop the game dead. Another issue stems from simply not having the experience with the source material reference to solve some of the more in-depth puzzles. You can't guess what you don't know, and with very little to guide your thinking in this game, it could quickly start to feel insurmountable in text parser form. The Master System game's use of a small list of verbs and nouns runs in the other direction entirely. It removes a lot of the guesswork, but this can be deflating if you enjoy dreaming up your own solutions to problems. There's no way to edit or add to these, nor are you permitted to really think outside of them. In my experience, when I entered a new screen for the first time, more often than not, I ended up staring at the words for clues rather than analyzing the environment. And frankly, this method straight up spoils some of the mysteries of the game. You can automatically see all the things you can interact with in your noun list, which consequently extinguished my curiosity before it had any chance to develop. I will admit that having everything on display was great for the handful of times I got stuck, and it definitely helped to keep the game moving forward. Unfortunately though, it prevented me from sinking into the game world as much as I would have liked to. I feel like both playstyles are fun in their own rights, but for me personally, I prefer the text parser option. I enjoy the discomfort of sitting with a problem brewing rather than forcing progress by smashing nouns and verbs together until something sticks. I can understand why they went for this route for a console port, but to me, it's an inferior way to experience the story. It's not as if the Master System version lacked the capability for typing. In fact, there's a great example of just how nightmarish text parsing might have been if it had been implemented, and it's perfectly expressed in the password system. The game's worst feature by far is the lack of a proper save function. One of my favorite parts about playing King's Quest on a computer was breathing a sigh of relief and saving my game after narrowly escaping death. Whether it was avoiding a trip into the sky with the witch or outmaneuvering that pesky moat, getting that save in was almost as exhilarating as the small victory itself. The Master System game doesn't have a save battery and instead relies on a password feature. By definition, it's functional, but it isn't very practical. I can already feel the eyes of everyone watching rolling in unison at the number of characters here, but that's not even the most annoying part of it. Anytime you die and want to restore your game, you have to punch in your entire password again. Yes, you heard that right. To restore your game, you have to input a 31-character code every single time. Now, if you've played this game and you know how often death sneaks up on you, you also probably understand that it's unreasonable to take down a new password every time you survive a screen transition. Because of how often I died, I routinely lost progress, making for a lot of backtracking and repetition of previous steps to catch back up again. Certain aspects of the game, like the long and terrible stair climb where one wrong move can kill you, were particularly annoying when I had to enter this beast of a code just to try again. It wasn't anything that pushed the experience to an unplayable status, but it definitely cut the fun off at the knees by introducing so much tedium to something that's usually so simple. Passwords make perfect sense if you're turning off the system and want to come back to your game later, but in this case, there was no reason for continuing in the same play session to be this nasty. Even having an option to autofill a password from the last living state prior to death would have been kinder than this, but it is what it is, I suppose. I can't imagine how many kids back in the day got Sir Graham into trouble and ended up having to start the game over again after writing down a wrong password. Thank goodness for modern day technology and the ability to take a picture of the screen. Another thing that baffled me was not being able to speak to most of the characters I met. Usually you can have short exchanges with people or even talk to the animals, but here these interactions weren't possible at all. Heck, there's not even a talk option in the menu for most of the game. And that wasn't the only thing that was missing either. In the original DOS release, as you walked around and actively checked your surroundings, you were treated to some illustrative text to highlight important objects. While this isn't entirely gone from the Master System game, the majority of the humor is. The little sarcastic comments that used to dress up the gameplay are completely absent, along with some of the challenge as well. A really good example of this is a hungry rat you meet. In the Master System version, you can feed the little guy from a safe distance across the room without breaking a sweat, but in the DOS version, you have to risk death by getting close enough to do it. And even after you succeed, there's a witty line about checking to see if you have all your fingers. These fun details and many others were scrubbed from the Master System game, and while their absence doesn't affect the ability to play it, I did feel it detracted from the overall experience. For the life of me, I also couldn't figure out how to further examine stuff in my inventory. Once I picked something up, it was impossible to look at it afterward, and I'm not sure how you were expected to figure out some of the puzzles because of this. Without giving too much away, the best example of this I can think of is not being able to look at the bowl. In the DOS version, there's a hint that you can get from that action that leads you to knowing where and when to use it. But without prior knowledge of the solution here, I can't understand how anyone could ever put that together without the prompt. If players want to sit around stringing together all of the verb options with the bowl until something works, that's one thing. But that's no way to play an adventure game. This was definitely an oversight and possibly a game killer for those trying to play this for the first time this way. Speaking of game killers, this iteration felt a lot more unstable than other Master System cartridges. At least once or twice a play session, it bugged out on me completely. It might just be my cartridge, but it was a notable issue worth mentioning considering how reliable the cartridges normally are. Anyway, I suppose it's safe to say that the Master System version of King's Quest, Quest for the Crown, is definitely a departure from the traditional Sierra game experience on PC, but that's not to say that it's not a worthy venture. Among many other computer games that were ported to the Master System, like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego or Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar, King's Quest also had to have some interface changes made to adapt it to an entirely different format. And it was a formidable effort, all things considered. While I think a couple of things could have been done differently to make the transition and play experience smoother, the console installment does reflect most of the game and presents it in a brand new way for an entire audience of people that may not have had another option to play it at the time. I know for myself, we didn't have the ability to enjoy many computer games, and console versions were usually my only option. While I don't think the Master System port of King's Quest is the best way to play it, it's definitely a good substitute for people wanting to experience a familiar adventure with a fresh coat of paint, or even see a couple of alternative puzzle solutions to keep them on their toes.